As many of you might be aware, we've been celebrating Lawyer Wellbeing Week. What a fitting time for this to come. This is our last day, and we are very lucky to have both Gary Laturno and Lera Blevins here today to do a follow-up for a webinar that Gary put on about a little over a month ago that was very, very well received. And you don't have to have listened to that webinar to understand what's happening here today, but I do want to encourage you, if you have not, that that webinar is available, and I'm going to give you the title, and we'll also put it in the chat. Conquering Chronic Disease and Pre-Existing Conditions in the Age of COVID-19, How Lifestyle Changes Can Reverse Most Chronic Disease. So as I said, if you haven't watched it, please go check it out. And if you have, hopefully today, I know there was a lot of information in that webinar, so hopefully today you can sort of hone in your eating skills. So let's see, I'm going to, essentially this is going to be very free form. If you have any questions, please put it in your chat. I'm going to have Gary and Lera give a little bit of their background and how they got into this way of eating. And then Gary's going to give us a little bit of background on this type of eating lifestyle. And then I have some questions that were asked in advance by individuals that we will get to. So I will have Gary start first and give us a little bit of background about himself and how he got into this lifestyle, and then we'll move to Lera.
Okay, great. Hey, thank you very much, Sara. Well, my background, my interest in this was because my family had some significant issues with regard to chronic disease. First of all, I was a young FBI agent, and I learned that my mom had died of a stroke. And, you know, she was in her probably mid-40s, early 40s. And I recall as a little kid that her dad had died of the same thing. And so that really concerned me. But when my mom died, I thought, wow, it was a great loss in my life. And I still think of my mom and her contributions to me and the family. But my dad lived to be 86, 87. But the last 10 or so years of his life, he was absolutely miserable. And he had kidney problems, prostate cancer, and he was just, you know, he was on dialysis. He was very, very unhappy. So I went out in the world to try to find out, you know, is this in fact something that's a problem that I'm going to have to face? Or, you know, what can I do about this? Is this, and I learned a lot. And when I was in the FBI, because of some things that happened, and I'll share those things with you as I go on, but let me pass it over to Lera now, and she can share with us her situation and family situation.
Thank you, Gary. Hi, everyone. Lera Blevins. I'm happy to be here. First and foremost, I'm an attorney, like most of you, or probably all of you, and I deal with real property law. It was around January, I'd say, that my husband and I, we took our 9-month-old to his pediatrician. And at that appointment, our pediatrician started talking to us about what our plan was now that we were introducing solid foods to our child. And most children switch from breast milk to some form of dairy milk at a year, essentially. And we were surprised when our pediatrician actually told us to consider putting our child on a whole food plant-based diet. And when we started asking him questions more about that, and, you know, why a whole food plant-based, what does that mean? And Gary will talk more about this on what a whole food plant-based diet means. But what we gathered is for his overall health, to avoid chronic disease, all the things that Gary will mention, it would really promote for not only children, but adults as well. So from that appointment, we basically dove into a bunch of resources that our pediatrician provided us, and my husband and I decided as a family, we were going to shift our lifestyle completely. And we decided to adopt a whole food plant-based diet because of that advice from our pediatrician. And one of the particular things that was kind of funny to us was when our pediatrician told us to consider this diet, we mentioned to him, you know, we are very health conscious. we exercise, we eat what we think are healthy oils, olive oil, avocado oil, and eat only organic meats. And his response to us was that he used to be like us too, until he actually did his own research, which really resonated with me because I think this was the first time that I ever had a doctor talk to me about nutrition. And Gary, I'll throw it back to you, but because I know that you have a lot to say about this topic.
Yes, Sara, who's our chair, we had talked about, doing a number of things. Do you want me to start out with some of the leading causes of death and disability? Have any thoughts about that?
Sure, that's fine, Gary. So Gary's going to share some of his slides from his previous webinar. Again, this webinar was very lengthy, and this is just a portion of it. But he's going to go through some of the slides to sort of give you a little bit of background, and then we're going to get into some of the more practical questions that we think some of you might have.
Yeah, let me say this. I've taught this class a number of times, over the last 4 or 5 years, and I found that people really, when they see this, their leading causes of death and disability, it really makes an impact. So let me just go on and see what we can do to talk about it. First of all, our healthcare costs are huge, more than double the average of all developed nations. And what's incredible, I think, is we have less than 5% of the world's population. We spend just under 50% of the world's total expenditures on healthcare. So, questions we ask are, why is this so expensive? Are we getting our money's worth? The goal, I think, that all of us have is to live a long, healthy life. And so a couple questions, what is our life expectancy, and what is the quality of our life? If you look at the numbers, we rank last in life expectancy among all developed nations. And it's interesting that Japan ranks number 1. Their life expectancy is considerably longer than ours, and they spend about half per person on healthcare. And the tragedy, I think, in the United States is that, chronic disease and disability really is looked upon as a normal part of aging. And, when you think about it, the question is, are we starting to live longer or are we dying longer, as my dad did? And you look at Japanese seniors, and how many really healthy senior people do we have in their 70s, 80s, 90s? And the answer is, I don't think that many. And chronic disease rates in Japan are considerably lower than the United States. Before World War II, these diseases, cancer, common cancers, heart disease, were just not known. And it was only after the war, when Western agriculture was introduced into Japan, that began to get these diseases. So one of the questions that's interesting to think or look about is what happens when the Japanese relocate to California. And that is what we find is they experience significantly higher rates of chronic disease, less viability in their later years, and their life expectancy falls. And so Dean Ornish, who's at the University of California in San Francisco, and by the way, Dean Ornish is one of the leaders in the lifestyle medicine movement. His recent book, which was published last year, called Undo It, is just one of the best things I've ever read, and I would highly recommend that you all read it, as well as listening to his TED Talks. But what he says really, and he has a short TED Talk on this, it's 3 or 4 minutes, is that when people migrate to the US, they begin to live like us, eat like us, and die like us. Tragic. So let me just change the pace a little bit and talk about what do the following presidents have in common? The Roosevelts, Dwight Eisenhower, Richard Nixon, Lyndon Johnson. Answer, they all died of vascular disease, heart disease. The #1 reason why people die in the Western world. In fact, 1 person in this country dies of a heart attack every 60 seconds. And actually, if you add strokes, it's probably 1 every 30 to 40 seconds. And strokes, it's essentially the same disease. It's a vascular disease. We have, non-fatal strokes, but that's the #1 cause of death or disability. And it's interesting, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which we've heard a lot about recently because of COVID-19, their job is to prevent chronic disease and pre-existing conditions. And what is their advice on this? See your doctor. Let me just tell you something. Doctors have out of medical school, they have no training at all on lifestyle issues. They're trained, no question, I've talked to this about them, on drugs and surgical procedures. So really, what is killing us? I lived in New Orleans. I was in the FBI office there for about 6 years. And as I said, I love the city, but it's almost a badge of honor. When I was there, they said we lead the US in strokes and heart attacks. And I talked to a friend recently. I saw one of the physicians down in New Orleans talking about the tragedy of the death from COVID. He said, we're screwed. Food we eat is killing us. And some people here in San Diego have said, well, we really don't have to worry about that. That's a problem in the stroke zone, 10 southern states. But if you look at mortality rates, heart disease is widespread throughout the United States. In fact, among those between the ages of 45 and 65, the death rates are increasing in all cities across the country. So what's the first sign of vascular disease? Tragically, as I say, it's a stroke or a heart attack. And then probably about half the men in this country after 40 to 50 have erectile dysfunction. And that's kind of a wake-up call. So I'm going to tell you something. If you look at this worldwide, sexual dysfunction, which, by the way, happens to women, is not a natural part. Is just not a natural part of aging. And you know, what happens? Arteries get clogged because of the plaque that builds in the arteries, and adequate blood just cannot get to the genital area of the body. The U.S. military, as you can see here, spends a lot of money every year on erectile dysfunction drugs. By the way, you know, big question, is this disease, vascular disease, restricted to heart attacks and strokes? And the answer is no. I was reading a book called 100 Doctors Can't Be Wrong. And in that was numerous articles by medical doctors. And there was an article that appeared by Jimmy Conway. He was an orthopedic surgeon. And he gets a chance, an opportunity to see people. It's not just talking about the heart and the brain, blockages in patients throughout their entire body. And he goes in, he tries to fix things, and there's no blood going in there. And John McDougall, who's a phenomenal lifestyle medicine doctor who's done some incredible work. And in fact, his book is one of my favorites. It's called The Starch Solution. He points out here that vascular disease goes throughout our entire body. And degenerative discs, back pain, ruptured discs, probably in terms of money that's spent, it's in that area. And these are all, basically not all, but substantially due to the fact that we don't have good blood flow. So if you look inside our vascular system, here's the problem. If you grew up in the United States in the Western world, you have atherosclerosis developing your arteries. And we've looked at young Americans who are killed in Korea versus young Asian soldiers. Autopsies of American soldiers by the time they're in their 20s have significant plaque. Asian soldiers who eat a very different diet, very different arteries, clean arteries. So what causes all this? Dr. Esselstyn, who is at the Cleveland Clinic, one of several doctors, has shown that it's completely reversible on a whole food plant-based diet. Says it's the food. It's the food. And I have a friend who's a cardiology nurse who worked for Dean Ornish at the University of California, and she says they've seen that virtually every 10-year-old in the United States has some arterial plaque, and she's seen it in kids as young as 4. So, let me mention one other, if we have the time, I'd like to just comment on cancer, which is probably has even, doesn't kill as many people in the United States, but it scares probably more people. And there's no question that a great deal of progress has been made with this because of our work against lung cancer. We're still fighting smoking, we're making progress. And melanomas, there's been some new drugs that cause it not to metastasize. But the bad news, the obesity-related cancers are up. And here's a list of them. And an epidemiologist at Harvard points out what we are seeing with obesity appears to be parallel to what we saw with cigarette smoking. And obesity, is this the new norm? The numbers are increasing and impacting kids. And I think, when I was a kid, obesity was really pretty rare. But today, it's a significant problem. And 1/3 of all Americans are overweight. It's just, by 2030, nearly 1 in 2 adults, it's predicted if we keep going at this rate, will be obese, and 1 in 4 severely obese. Let me just go on and talk about this. Oh, okay. I think I'm going to end right there. I think that's a point that my understanding clearly is that these are diseases that, as Dr. Campbell points out, who did the China study, genes are the seeds, but lifestyle is the fertilizer. So it's clear we have a huge ability to, in fact, take action and change our lifestyles, become a lot healthier and happier. So let me just end that right there and turn it over back to Sarah.
If you'll stop sharing your screen, then we can get back to the main view, and we'll probably come back to your screen again as
there we go.
come up. So I did receive several questions in advance that I'd like to pose to both of you. And some of them are very specific to what's going on right now with the coronavirus. So I think that'll be very helpful for our listeners. And that first one is, we've been reading a lot about meat plants closing down and meat shortages and people sort of panicking about not having meat and being forced to change their diet. And what would you say, Gary, I'll start with you, and then Lera, I'll move to you. Is this a real thing to panic about? Do we need to be panicking that we don't have meat in our diets?
Let me tell you, this is my opinion. As I see it, it's a great opportunity for us because, in fact, in 1940 approximately, you look at Norway, dairy cattle and beef were domesticated in northwestern Europe about 10,000 years ago. And Norway had a lot of dairy cattle and very high rates of heart disease. And what happened in 1940? The German army came in. They took all this stuff away to feed soldiers in the German army. And by the way, stress levels in Norway at the time did not go down. I mean, they went up, and people talk about stress as a cause of heart disease. And Dr. Esselstyn points out it's a foodborne disease. So what happened? Heart disease basically disappeared for about 4 years. The rates went down radically. And after the war, dairy cattle came back, and we didn't get it. In fact, I grew up in a dairy country, so to speak, in Minnesota and Wisconsin. It's full of Norwegians who have, dairy industries are booming, or at least they were. And so you have a lot of heart disease, and we have a product, that provides the basis for that. So I would submit to you that don't stress. Just, think about, look at some of this material and think about, it's really time to no longer just shrug it off. It's time to make some changes in your life if you really want to be healthy.
And Lera, did you experience a little bit of that? Maybe panic isn't the right word, but when your doctor did, come to you and sort of come at you with this information, did you have that moment of panic like some people might be panicking right now?
I didn't have the moment of panic so much as my family did about us not feeding our child meat and us not eating meat. The huge misconception is, how are you guys going to get protein? How is that baby going to get his protein? And the response is through everything we eat, whether it's tofu, tempeh, legumes. We eat a lot of lentils, a lot of chickpeas, peanuts, rice and beans together, nuts and quinoa, and even vegetables. Broccoli has plenty of protein, and that's something that people don't understand or just don't believe. They think you can't get protein without your solid steak, and that's just not the case. It's just kind of us having to shift the idea of how people think, and it not be scary to not eat meat.
Right.
It not be strange to not eat meat.
Exactly. I mean, when you're looking at sort of that traditional pyramid, when you see the protein section, there is no broccoli in that section. There is no quinoa in that section. So right. I think it's a very good point that protein, we don't have to envision steak and chicken and pork when we're thinking of protein. I think Gary has a comment, and I'm just going to say, I think this leads us into a great segue into what do you eat? What does a plate look like? What is your day of eating look like? So I'll throw Gary, you can add something to this and then talk to us about what you really are eating during the day.
Well, let me say that one of the things here is people, have very a challenge. I think that's less and less so as we go on. But if you want to get some science on this in a very, informative way, Milton Mills, who's a medical doctor, went to Stanford, has something that, I think it's kind of unique. He has a very substantial background in chemistry. And he has some really good YouTube videos that explain that only plants can take protein from the sun, the air, and make protein. And so if you eat animal foods with all their problems, you are eating recycled plant protein. And people are shocked to hear that. What? And it's absolutely correct. I mean, the real problem, I think, is that we get hooked on some of these foods. And one of the things we don't really appreciate is that many of these foods, and the food industry is pretty smart to figure this out, of course, they have an opiate in it. And for example, cow's milk has an opiate. Why? To bring the cow back, because it's supposed to gain, 600,000 pounds in a year or so? When you make cheese, for example, you drain the water, the liquid out, you have a very highly concentrated opiate, and it's very addictive, and people say, I can't give up cheese. And the same thing is essentially true of meat. I love this stuff. You're crazy not to eat this. And the answer is, you're now really, let's put it this way, you're a drug addict. So, I mean, I think understanding that, and in fact, I've got some slides that go into this in some detail. And one of the doctors, I'm going to tell you, Neil Barnard, who is he's a physician in Washington, D.C. He's at the medical school at George Washington University. He's also president of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. His dad died of Alzheimer's. He grew up in a dairy meat farm in North Dakota. And one of my favorite books, I absolutely love this, Power Foods for the Brain. He talks about this, and he's a very bright guy. In fact, I took a class of his at Scripps Clinic in San Diego. So this is a book I really, really think you guys would love to read. It's got all this stuff about food and its effect on you. So that's what I do.
Very quickly, two things. So I think what we'll do, Gary and Lera, is on our website, on the Health and Wellness Committee webpage, what we'll end up doing is having a list of these resources. And one of the questions a little bit later on that someone asked is about books and documentaries, which we'll get to, that are, that you might suggest watching. And so we'll make sure to put a list so that you guys have a reference to go back to. So Gary, what do you eat? What's your day look like? When you wake up, what's for breakfast?
Whole plant foods. Let me say, I think that a lot of people say, well, this is daunting. What do I eat? And that's understandable completely. I mean, when I figured out, when I heard the doctors at Scripps Clinic, I went to a lecture in connection with RPI Physical at the time. And they explained that a group of people that they were working with as patients had come to La Jolla from the Northeast, and they basically ate animal foods three times a day. And they had significant problems with obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease, and cancer. And they radically changed their diets to put them on a whole food plant-based diet. And that was one of a number of things I had heard that finally convinced me that I needed to do that. And when I went out, I didn't really have any real specific guidance. So what did I do? What are the things I liked? Answer, starches, like beans and rice with tomato sauce, oatmeal. You have plant-based milks now, and corn on the cob, potatoes. You know, people say, oh, I've got a snack. Hey, take I prefer like, for some reason, organic sweet potatoes taste better. I don't know, maybe they're no different. It's in my mind. They cost a few pennies more, but put them in a microwave, 3-4 minutes, and they're delicious. And the thing is, if you eat some candy, whatever people eat out of a package, it has absolutely no fiber, no nutrients. And what happens, it fast tracks the biological process, goes directly into your bloodstream, and it clogs your arteries and makes you obese, gains weight, get no nutrients. And, you know, by using nutrients, as Dr. McDougall, John McDougall, has a terrific PowerPoint, or not PowerPoint, but video, TED Talk on starches, and the fact the most successful populations in the world have eaten starches. The Roman army existed on barley. They conquered Europe. So these are the kinds of things, plus some fruits, and a lot of fruit. You can eat any fruit at all. And the problem with fruit, though, is it tastes good, but it's not very filling. So you don't want to be hungry. That's the worst thing you can do. You get hungry, you know, get a sweet potato. You know, there's so many options. And I've got a section in the slides on eating well, which is slides 50 through 57, because the number one question I get from people when I talk about this at these classes is, what do I eat? And so
So let's do this, Gary. Let's have Lera talk a little bit about what her day looks like, or what her plate looks like, and then let's go to your slides.
Okay, great.
So Lera, what do you, you know, is there like sort of a typical day, or how do you sort of build a plate around your way of eating?
Yeah, so we actually didn't change that much from how we ate before, because we ate whole foods, whole grains, brown rices, those types of things. We just had to take the meat portion out and change the way we cooked a little bit, because whole food plant-based means no oil. So you aren't doing the olive oil, the avocado oil, anything that I thought was considered healthy. So in the morning, we usually eat oatmeal with some form of fresh berries on it, or dried berries, really whatever we have, some coconut, maybe throw in a little bit of nuts. And that's most breakfast, or some form of like whole grain cereal or muesli with a plant-based milk on it, either soy or oat milk. I mean, there's so many alternatives out there now. On the weekends are hard because my husband is a big breakfast guy. I mean, if he could have eggs and bacon and breakfast potatoes on the weekends, that was like what he considered home. So we still do the breakfast potatoes. We just do them on parchment paper in the oven without oil, and they're phenomenal. I mean, who would have known that you could cook without oil? Breakfast potatoes, hashes that have sweet potatoes and beans, or whatever it is that we have available with grains. So really, it hasn't changed that much. Lunch is usually, it could still be a salad, and instead of having chicken on it, you have chickpeas on it. with various vegetables and basically what you kind of have on hand, and some form of grain. And then dinner, we are still building a plate the same as we were before, as far as you have either a brown rice or a quinoa, and then what is your main? Well, maybe the main tonight is a sweet potato, because I don't know anybody that doesn't like a sweet potato, with, some broccoli on the side and a nice curry sauce. It's really just the type of food that you like to eat. And we continue cooking those types of foods, whether it be, a curry sauce or an Asian style sauce. It really hasn't changed that much, except for the meat is removed. We also, and I know I mentioned this to you guys before, we use it's a vegan company that provides recipes it's a food box essentially to our door, and we use those 3 nights a week just because we both work and we're busy. And that gives us the recipes and all the produce to create really awesome meals. The one we use is purple carrot, but there's a ton of them, and they're super easy, super flavorful. And if you wanted to dip your toe into plant-based eating, that's a really easy way.
Yeah.
That's a great suggestion. Terrific. I think, for those that get overwhelmed, to have some guidance from somebody or a recipe, I think that's a great suggestion, Lera.
Yeah.
Gary,
let me mention one other thing, and I'll be thrilled to go on to the slides, but one of the things that I learned, maybe a little bit the hard way, is that low fat, that was a concern to me in the beginning. How can I eat? Because the diet I eat is probably no more than 10% fat. The thing is, your body's preferred source of energy is complex carbohydrates. They burn fast, and you feel great, you're very satisfied. But when you take in fats, such as avocados, any kind of food that has fat in it, even nuts and seeds are very high in fat. It's very high to gorge on nuts that are cooked with oil and salt. Not a good idea. What will happen is that the fat you eat becomes the fat you wear. And if you're trying to lose weight, and you have a little stuff around your, what a little or a lot, just think in terms of getting rid of that. In fact, Kaiser's book on plant-based eating and Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Ornish emphasize that you cannot, if you want to reverse vascular disease, you want to get your weight down, you cannot be eating these fatty foods, and olive oil is one of them. In fact, in 1900, typical American throughout the year would eat about 2 pounds of oil. Today, it's almost up to like 200 pounds. And we wonder why we have all these obese, and what does that do? It is not heart healthy. And now if you grew up eating that with a lot of vegetables and not meat, I spent about 2 weeks in Spain and Portugal last December, and they still use a lot of oil, but they also use they don't eat meat very much, and they eat a lot of vegetables. Okay? Hopefully that will.
You want to share your slides, Gary?
Sure. Yeah, okay. Okay, sure. Okay, now we're going to go to, let's see, slide 50. Okay, getting started. Eat well, maintain a healthy BMI. First of all, got a couple things that I would suggest you reread in my PowerPoint. And one of them is, I have a few slides on the China study. It's powerful information. And then the blue zones. Some of you, I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with National Geographic's Blue Zone. And the one that's been studied most of all is here in Loma Linda, the Seventh-day Adventists. And I see more studying in the last 50 years has been done in this group, and I've summarized the findings. And, not every Adventist eats the same way, but the ones, by the way, they start out no alcohol. Sorry, guys. Sorry. In fact, I I have a friend who watched the PowerPoint, the presentation a couple of weeks ago, said his wife watched. He said, why didn't Gary mention anything about alcohol? And there's only so much you can cover. But by the way, I have cut way back on alcohol. I don't, I have a beer maybe once a week and it just works better. But anyway, the blue zone, the only group in the blue zone that's able to maintain a very desirable body mass index is the group that doesn't eat any animal foods, that's on a whole food, plant-based, low-fat diet. And then I've got like 6-7 pages that summarizes Dr. Esselstyn's book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. I also recommend watch his TED Talk. He's a very charming, wonderful guy. He's contributed, he's well into his 80s. He's still very dignified and very effective. And then I've got some information about the slides that where you reverse vascular disease by Esselstyn. I guess that's the same thing. I guess I don't have to change that slide. So let me go on here. Okay, I mentioned starches. That's the key to success, really. Emphasize starches: beans, whole grains, barley, oats, corn on the cob, sweet potatoes, yams, whole grain pasta. That is really going to satisfy you. And read John McDougall's book. In fact, if you want to go up and you really want to struggle with this, you want to spend a week in there, he does have seminars where you can go in and spend the week, get some lectures, and he's just a phenomenal guy. And some foods, as I mentioned this already, are addictive. And if you understand that, I think it's easier to get away. And then why low fat, why no, and I mentioned this, I've already covered this. I'm going to go on to the next one. This is also interesting. We wonder why we're so heavy and so sick. There's a companion to the a documentary, Forks Over Knives, which is edited by Gene Stone. By the way, Gene Stone writes a lot of books for some of the top doctors in this area, like Dr. Krieger. In fact, I'd love to get Gene Stone to write a book for one of us, but maybe he's not available at the price we would want to pay. Anyway, meat consumption. It's 120 pounds on average per person 100 years ago, 220 today. Processed sugar, 40 pounds, from 40 pounds to 147. Dairy products. Wow, this is amazing. So none of these foods are heart, brain, or body healthy. They're not going to make you slender. They're not going to make you beautiful. They're basically what you're doing is you're slowly, with every bite, you're really basically adding to an unhealthy you. Kaiser Permanente has really, at least their policy is to promote this, but they're having trouble getting, I think, all the doctors on board. It's just not happening. And they've actually, what they've done now is they've started their own medical school here in Southern California. And one of the reasons, I'm told, is by people who work at Kaiser, is because of this issue. Hey, they're not just a healthcare provider; they're an insurance company. So it's in their best interest to have people who don't need a lot of drugs and surgery. Okay, keys to success. People have talked about this, and I think Lera, I think she started eating. By the way, she's a great success story. I love to hear her talk about these things but I think you've got to, first of all, you got to really know why you're doing this, what's at stake. And if you commit yourself to 21 days or better, 30 days, a kickstart, and eat whole plant foods, no processed foods, no junk food. And as I say, I'm really emphasize low fat. In my experience, what's happened to me? I love the food. I mean, I was very motivated, but the pounds melted away. I wake up every morning, I have back pains. I'm wondering what's going on. And when the pounds melted away, the back pain went, my weight dropped from about 180, 185 to 145. And I mean, it just disappeared. My blood pressure was up to 155. And now it's way down. Last checked, it was 108 over 68. And my total blood cholesterol is now down to 110. And I don't take any drugs at all. So that's what I've been able to do. So let's go back. It's I'll get out of the screen. How do I get out of this?
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, stop sharing.
And I'd like to, I think that's a great segue for Lera. Have you, since you and your husband have changed this way of eating, have you noticed any health benefits or how you're feeling when you wake up in the morning, or your sleep patterns or anything like that?
Absolutely. We both talk about it all the time. One, we're both, my baby is 13 months now, and I'm 10 pounds less than I was before I got pregnant. I dropped down to my pre-pregnancy weight pretty fast. But the fact that, just from shifting our diet and not changing anything else, I dropped an additional 10 pounds and I feel fantastic. My husband's lost 25 pounds and hasn't really changed anything else. And I told Gary, his face is not as inflamed. He's not as red. He's not as puffy. He doesn't have the aches and pains that he was having before. Inflammation is going away really quickly. And both of us, for me, I committed to this and I'm like, I'm all in. For my husband, I wasn't so convinced because I had mentioned to both of you that, he smoked meat on the weekends. That was one of his hobbies. And he's a big guy. He was a center in college playing football. So he's the typical gonna eat meat, gonna eat, bacon on the weekends kind of guy. And since he's committed to this, we both talked about it and we're like, we don't see ourselves ever going back. We feel good. We look good. Just everything about this has shifted our attitudes. And obviously we understand the benefits behind it all that I think can help push to maintain this.
Right. Yeah.
And then Lera, I've been waiting for this question to ask you as we've been preparing for today is, what are you feeding your child? What are you going to do as, your child gets older and might be a little bit more pickier? What are you learning about children eating whole plant-based diets?
Okay. So right now, luckily, he eats basically whatever you give him. If we are having sweet potatoes, he has sweet potatoes and broccoli and green beans. He eats beans with pretty much every meal, or lentils, whole grain pasta. He eats exactly what we eat. I've listened to a lot of podcasts about parents who, it's easy for him because he's one, but I've listened to about switching to a whole plant-based diet when your kids are, say, 4, 5, that have experienced other things and they still want those things. And what I've listened and heard is that it's a transition, and you just have to kind of start introducing those foods. And as you introduce them over and over and over again, it just becomes normal and it becomes what you eat.
Right.
But also, if your kid goes to a birthday party and there's non-vegan or non-whole food plant-based cookies, can they have a cookie? Yeah, give them a cookie. You don't have to be perfect all the time is kind of the general attitude that I've received on that. And I think we'll probably stick to that, but we'll see what happens as things move along.
Right. Yeah.
And then my second favorite question was, what about, especially during now when there's a lot of stress around us, what do you snack on? What's your comfort food? What's your stress food? I think, a lot of us gravitate towards food for comfort, or when we're, sort of emotionally eating. Does that sort of stop a little bit on this diet, or do you still grab that celery and crunch really hard, or what do you do? Gary?
Answer?
Sure.
Well, I find eating, I love to eat. I eat a great deal. It's amazing. I have no idea how many calories I eat. But if you don't eat, again, fats, you've got to eat more stuff to fill you up, because fats have more than double the calories of carbohydrates or protein. And again, the foods we mentioned, I love whole grain pasta at night, with some tomato sauce. By the way, I don't get marinara sauce or pasta sauce because it's got oil in it. And I just love this. I just eat whenever I'm hungry. A couple of days ago, my wife and I went to the golf course for the first time in a couple of months. I brought with me a yam and some corn on the cob. And I like it, just it fills you up. I feel happy, I'm satisfied, and I don't have to think about it. I remember times when I'd eat, you know, like Oreo cookies or something, you eat a whole bag, and you're not happy, you just keep on eating, you feel terrible. I don't feel terrible now,
And
so
Lera, what about you? Do you have any tips or?
I eat a lot of hummus. So a lot of hummus and carrots. There are brands of crackers that I found that don't contain oil in them. A lot of rice crackers don't have oil in them. And then there's some flatbreads that don't have oil. So hummus and crackers, or carrots and hummus. Hummus is just an easy way, if you can find it that doesn't have oil in it, of just having a very satisfying snack. I do eat nuts still in moderation, but I am not overweight. So nuts are an issue if you are on the overweight side or trying to maintain your weight. But I still do eat some nuts, but kind of stick to my portions, and I try not to overdo it. And dried fruit too. Dried fruit that doesn't have sugar added to it is definitely like an easy snacker. There's a lot more health conscious style snacks out there if you look for them. And especially living in Southern California. We have Whole Foods, we have other places that you can go to actually purchase these kinds of things, and they don't have to be overly expensive or, complicated. It's stuff with less ingredients that is always better.
Yeah.
And what about, I know some people have had some struggles getting fresh produce or, access right now, not wanting to go to the grocery store very often. Do you have any tips or tricks for those individuals, either about, storing vegetables or frozen? Can we eat canned vegetables? And what does that look like in this coronavirus age?
Lera, why don't you answer that?
Yeah, so as far as frozen vegetables go, not all frozen vegetables are created equally. Frozen broccoli is kind of gross. But frozen green beans are wonderful because they are waxy and hearty, and you can roast them or you can throw them in a pan and get a char on them, and they're still good. But cook what you have. No, it's okay to eat, the pastas that you have in your pantry and the canned beans you have in your pantry, or even the canned vegetables are fine too. I don't see any issue with that. Do you, Gary?
No, well,
obviously fresh.
I try to avoid them, but hey, if this is what you have, it's better than eating a steak. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, by far. Yeah.
Gary, do you have anything else to add on that front?
Well, somebody raised a question about the cost. It's very expensive to be, and I'm not sure if I get that, because first of all, beans, if you just buy beans, they're just incredibly cheap. And you can soak them overnight and cook them, and whole grains are not one of my favorites is barley, hulless barley, and I buy 5 pounds at a time from Amazon, and that lasts a long time. And then there's potatoes, corn. I mean, those things they'll last a while. You can leave corn in the cob in the refrigerator. I've never tried to freeze it, but I mean, those things in themselves, they're incredibly cheap. So I'm not sure where people, by the way, the United States government subsidizes the meat and dairy industries. Huge, that's another subject we won't get into today, but it's still, I think it's far more expensive to buy meats and things like that, assuming they're available, than it is to buy, beans and rice, By the way, in Mexico, it's interesting, with all the health problems they have far less breast cancer than in the United States. Why is that? I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Mexico. In fact, shortly after when I left the FBI, I went into a law firm. They sent me down to Guadalajara to meet with some tequila growers who wanted to import tequila into the United States. And I went to these villages, not Mexico City or not Guadalajara. I went into the villages. I was blown away by how slender and healthy these people looked. And the men, the women especially, but they had, you go to the Socolo where they have they sell the stuff. They had whole plant foods. That's what they're eating. They were very slender, healthy looking people. So a very different lifestyle from ours. So anyway.
I think one of the things, Gary, that struck me when we've been talking is that you don't use recipes. That's sort of like, an interesting,
Yes.
I think people get overwhelmed and what am I going to cook? And, and you said you never use recipes, right?
Well, let me say, my wife kids me all the time. Why? She likes to cook. And as I said to people, and I think I mentioned this to you and Lera, that a whole food plant-based diet will in fact make you much healthier, no doubt about it. But it's not going to change your personality for the most part. And if you want to be a cook, a chef, every book that we would suggest to you has in fact recipes in it. So, go for it. There's plenty of recipes. And I've looked at them, and again, my personality is the same. I like to take stuff and, basically fix it. So, and by the way, you're welcome. Come on over someday, and maybe after the virus, we'll spend a day. And I'm not sure that anybody would be interested in doing that, but so that's what I'd say about that.
And Lera, do you lean towards recipe or use certain cookbooks that you would recommend, or you are sort of a free form as Gary is?
So I have whole food plant-based diet recipe book. So I have the How Not to Die cookbook. But what I've realized since we've been cooking this way is that any recipe can pretty much be made whole food plant-based. And it's not that hard. The hard part was getting down the technique of cooking without oil. Cooking without oil, cooking without salt. Those two things were difficult at first.
And what are a couple of tips? One of the things I heard you said I thought was really interesting is the parchment paper. So
paper is wonderful. Or you could do the same thing with a silicone mat or recycled parchment paper. You can roast any vegetable in the oven with parchment paper. And then as far as people are like, well, how do you saute a vegetable in a skillet, in a pan? With water. And it's so easy. And if somebody would have told me that, I would have been like, you're crazy. I'm not cooking my vegetables in water in a saute pan. But it works, and the recipes still work fine. And anytime something calls for 2 tablespoons of oil, you just throw some water in the pan and you continue on your recipe like normal. It's no problem. So we've been able to adapt pretty quickly.
Yeah, I do love that tip that adapting a sort of regular recipe is not that difficult, because I think, as we've talked about, people get overwhelmed changing and making shifts. I have this question, which I didn't pose to you both before, but I was just thinking about it and want to ask, is if, people on that overwhelming front, people maybe going from, 0 to 100 is a little much. So what would you suggest if, they're going to make some small steps as they creep towards changing their diets? What would be, Gary, like the one thing would be no meat? Would that be your number one to, sort of take the meat out, and then maybe the dairy, then what sort of, do you have a hierarchy?
Well, yeah, I have some thoughts about that question. I think it's a great question. And I haven't eaten meat for probably 40 years. I stopped doing that many years ago. But I think most Americans think it's okay, and by the way, you can eat whatever you want to eat, that's your decision. But most people think it's okay to eat everything in moderation. And I just think if you're really serious about this, if you have a really serious health problem, and I sure did, I haven't talked about it, but about 8-9 years ago, my wife and I were walking around the golf course, and my left knee swelled up. And it was very painful. I got back to the house and put some ice on it, and the pain went away. But then I went to Kaiser, I said, fix this. They took an x-ray. They sent me off to see an orthopedic surgeon. And they said, you need a new knee. Your knee is destroyed, doesn't have any cartilage. And I said, are there any other options? I talked to several doctors, orthopedic surgeons, who said, yeah, the option is you can take pain pills the rest of your life. And so the other thing that was happening to me, starting to get pains in my chest. My blood pressure went up. So to make a long story short, I figured out that eating in moderation was destroying my health. And so I just don't think, it's whatever you do, it's your decision. And people who are younger often, I think what Lera's doing is very unusual, because many people in her age group, are very much open to, hey, this is America. This is the way we eat. This is the way we live. And I found that, as the years go on, if you want to continue to do that, it's a problem, a big problem. So today, I've never had any knee replacement surgery. And my knee is fine. I can walk all day. I have no pain at all. Because as Lera pointed out, inflammation. I don't have any inflammation, but I also learned there's some strengthening exercise. As the years go on, you lose muscle mass. And building up some muscles down there, I was able to get in to see a physical therapy at Kaiser. That was very, very helpful. And by the way, the last doctor I talked to, the orthopedic surgeon, the third one I saw looked at my x-rays and said, well, I see you don't have any cartilage. I said, that's not the knee that's a problem. The other one I had some cartilage that broke off. And she said, well, I see you've never been referred to physical therapy. And this was a young, very bright woman. And so I'm all in cheers and fan and these two guys I talked to, all they wanted to do, was new. In fact, I think, I read this stuff about knee replacements. There's a lot of knee replacements that are done that just aren't even necessary. And it's kind of like the frenzy that goes on back in the 40s and 50s with the tobacco companies. So, there's a huge problem, I submit, with our healthcare system. We really don't have a healthcare system. So that's a subject of another day, I think.
And Lera, you mentioned that maybe your husband, you were sort of maybe all in and your husband wasn't. Was there did he sort of gradually, sort of take things out, and what did that look like?
Yeah, so the first couple of weeks that we started, we were like, okay, we'll do 2 meals with meat a week. And that might look like, we'll do scallops or shrimp and probably like a fish. And mostly just seafood. And pretty quickly, both of us just stopped setting meat out of the freezer because we just didn't want it anymore. And it was almost like a natural transition that we just didn't really even talk about it. We're just like, all of a sudden, neither of us wanted meat anymore. And I don't think either one of us will go back to it. But to kind of echo what Gary was saying, as far as, between the inflammation and like the benefits of not having meat and having dairy, I suffer from really terrible allergies. Since I don't have dairy in my diet, I don't have to take an allergy pill. I don't do allergy shots. I don't even have a sniffle when everyone else is having terrible seasonal allergies. And that, to me alone, I'm like, I will never eat another piece of cheese. And now so meat, because I just don't have any of it. And it's wild. And the doctors told me to take allergy medicine every day and use Flonase. And none of it worked. And not eating dairy absolutely worked.
Oh, that's
right.
fascinating.
Hey, let me mention that this issue of seeing a physician, most doctors are, traditional physicians. Our healthcare has become, we expect as patients to go there and not be given, a class on, how to change our lifestyle. We want a pill. So we're, I think, to blame to a great extent for this. But it seems to me that the MD really is the leader, so to speak, of your healthcare team. And if you don't have any guidance and direction and insight from that person, increasingly, fortunately, there is a more and more lifestyle medicine physicians. Mine, for example, I finally found at Kaiser, is interesting. He grew up in Mexico. He's a very bright guy, went to Stanford, and, he has a huge number of patients. And, but most doctors they don't know anything more about how to be healthy than the public. In fact, the #1 cause of death among all doctors is heart disease. #1 cause of death among cardiologists is heart disease. And you know, it's really, you have to take the health in your own hands and take action, because chances are your doctor is just going to give you pills, recommend surgeries, and you know, who benefits from that? You don't. You continue to have pre-existing conditions, chronic disease, and you become, you know, a person who's vulnerable to these killer viruses, much more, because we now know that the people who are really getting sick and dying from this virus are people who are, we're watching 60 Minutes here, the very beginning of the process, and these doctors and nurses were almost crying about all these people dying. And the question was, you know, Vicki and I were sitting there, well, what's the #1 reason for death? They said was obesity. And the American Medical Association has now done a study of almost like 6,000 patients, and they found that in fact, high blood pressure, obesity, and diabetes are the leading conditions that pre-existing conditions that result in death. And these are all preventable, reversible. And our healthcare system, you know, I mean, thank God we've got these people who are working hard, but when you get to the people that you deal with when you have these problems, chances are you're going to get a pill, or as I was suggested, you're going to have surgery. And it's just unfortunate, greatly unfortunate.
Well, we are wrapping up on our hour. That went by very quickly. I want to thank both of you so much. It's very informative and inspiring. I will tell you that Gary is on our Health and Wellness Committee, and this is his platform. So we really are hoping for Gary to continue to provide resources through our Health and Wellness Committee. And I'm sure we'll tap Lera for some of her, you know, tips and tricks and other things that you'll be able to ultimately find on our webpage. A reminder, there is, I don't know, Gary, it was about an hour and a half, I think, or webinar, hour-ish, that has all of the PowerPoints. He just shared a little bit of them today. So I encourage you to watch that and go find that in our library. I don't know if either of you have any closing comments before we hop off.
Lera?
Oh, I just want to say thank you for having me. This is something I'm passionate about, so I'm excited to be part of it. And I'll provide you with my contact information, so if anybody wants to reach out to me, particularly people with children, if you have more questions, I'd be happy to be a resource. I have a lot of information to share.
Terrific.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you, Lera.
Hey, I want to thank Sara and John Richards, who's JR, who's your co-chair. JR and I have worked together on the executive committee of the Real Property Law section for a number of years. He's a terrific guy. And Lera, it's great to have you. And if you have any questions, want to talk about any of this, any suggestions, comments, you know, please get a hold of me. I'm happy to connect with you.